Hello everyone, this is Ian Cold here with the first devlog of my new project, Project Duce. So I have gotten a few things done over the last week and a bit. So before, the unit would always rotate right to try and get to a certain point, but now it rotates left or right depending on where the point is. It's a small thing, but it just helps. And that brings me on to rotating. So the unit can now rotate and aim at a point and lock in on it correctly. So when you're rotating towards a point before you start moving towards it, it can now do that correctly. Which doesn't seem like much, but it was actually a bit of a difficult thing for me, and I'll talk about why. So I went through a few different approaches. So the first approach would seem the simplest, where I use certain trigonomic functions in the game engine to calculate the angle that I needed to turn at, the rotation degrees I needed to face towards it, and I thought, okay, that'll work, that'll be nice and simple. Well, the thing is, the rotation point was very, very exact, and it had many decimal places. Now, if you don't know about the computer side of things, those are called doubles or floats, and the more precision, the more decimal places you add, the harder those are to actually compare. So, while I could get that exact rotation, actually turning to that exact rotation and doing that accurately was a challenge, because the comparison, the check if it's equal, that basically stops working after the 4th or 5th decimal place, and this went to 8 and 10 decimal places for precision. So I really tried to get that to work, but it's a technical limitation. When you have decimals that precise, the engine and the computation behind it, you just can't compare that accurately. So I threw that out, and the next thing I tried was using something called a tween. So a tween is something from animation, as in between frames. So you have a character with their arm in the air, and then the next frame of the animation would be them with their arm a little bit lower, and then a little bit lower, and then a little bit lower, until it's all the way at the bottom where you want it. And I tried using a property called a tween to essentially change the rotation little by little, like in an animation, to get to that exact rotation. But that also had issues where the tweens had to run many times. So each second, each clock tick of the computer, which is many times a second, it was doing a tween, and it would move it a little bit closer, and the rotation animation looked clean and it was nice, but because there's so many going at the same time, and there were kind of concurrency issues about when the tweens actually finished, and there was no way to really know or detect exactly when it was pointing exactly towards it and when it could stop. So I really tried to get that to work and get that to be able to check when it was done and handled smoothly, but I really just couldn't. But I did end up getting it to work, and it can now turn exactly to the point. So what I ended up doing was, when you click on a position you want the unit to move to, it creates a small little box, and I have something called a ray cast on the unit, which is essentially a very long straight line that's done mathematically, and if it hits anything on that line out for 1,000 points in front of the unit, then it will hit that line and I'll be able to detect that. And that's what I ended up doing, and I found that it worked. Is when the ray cast from the unit that's shooting out straight collides with that little box that is created where the mouse clicked, then it will stop rotating, and it will call that good, and then it will start the next phase, which is moving towards it. I found that that works, and I now have the rotating to a point and moving to that point working pretty well. So that's something I've added. Another thing is I've also added being able to move around the camera and somewhat zoom in and out the camera. I'm going off of, Total War controls, kind of. You can really play around with the camera, things like that. Now, with this game being 2D, I might not need as much of that, but my plan is to have a very, very large map and very, very large battles. So if you can't zoom in or out, that would be a challenge. But something I found when I added the zoom and the move is I had to change how I was checking the points, because there's several different position systems in the game engine. One of them is relative to the viewport or the camera. So if the camera is at 0, 0, this unit would be at 100, 100. But if the camera is moving around and it's not in a fixed place, that becomes a little unreliable. If you move around the camera, it's at 100, 100. If you don't move the camera, it's at 50, 50, and so on and so forth. So I had to change that to the position relative to the game scene itself, kind of that gray background you can think of it as. So that was another change I made. Had to tweak and recalibrate for that. So this was a week full of some very interesting technical problems, different approaches and trying to work with things differently. But I like how the unit moves, and I'm next going to start working on getting the unit to be able to move multiple times, which it currently cannot. But I'm going to work on that. I'll maybe start adding some terrain tiles, as well as trying to get the movement down for multiple units. If you select multiple units, that'll probably take a little while, but that's what I'll be working on next. So that's all for this week. I thought I would share that interesting technical challenge that I've now solved, so I can start working on some more features. I hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.